Viewpoint, a program of politicians, personalities, and perspectives. We sure have a couple of perspectives, and we got a great couple of personalities here this morning. We're missing one personality this morning, a sidekick, Judy Busby, enjoying some much-needed time, much earned time, a little sabbatical with her two daughters. So we're going to soldier on and do the best we can without the best part of the program. So by the way, we always did start, Bob, and let me see what your name is right. Bob and I know I'm putting her on here. Bob and Marilyn. I always try to start with kudos, and it seems to be appropriate today. We had a great band concert. You know, our Lincoln Area Music Society folks do a good job of entertaining down there. All these folks volunteer their time, and they put a lot of time in to rehearse, and an outstanding concert at the at Latham Park, and it was just so. We appreciate the fact that they do that for us, and with that in mind, I think it might be appropriate to hear something that might kick off the theme for today's Viewpoint. Okay, now that was the Stars and Stripes Forever, which reminds me of the old Latham Park band shell. In the good old days, quote, you know, there's nothing worse than an old timer who remembers, quote, good old days. People get sick of that. Nonetheless, the American Legion Band was a great band, and by the way, they were a decorated band. They had won several national championships in their heyday. And David Hanger, Sr., was a piccolo player on the Stars and Stripes Forever. When they got to that part, man, he could make them stand up and shout and prayer. So it was a nice, fun organization. By the way, last night, you happened to see the PBS, the Ken Burns special on the Statue of Liberty? Fascinating, just fascinating. Ken Burns does such a remarkable job on all subject matters that he chooses, and I thought this was just so well done. And I got to thinking about the difference of the immigrants of that time and the immigrants of today who are coming across the fences. And I got to thinking this, folks. What do you suppose those folks that were coming to this country way back then in the days of Ellis Island and the early times, what do you suppose they were expecting in the way of entitlements? They were expecting an opportunity. And that was the entitlement to which they thought that they were entitled. Well, today is a little bit different. And I don't know who's going to change that. It won't be changed in my time. But that's my political soapbox for so far. We're not done yet. This Viewpoint being a program of, fair and unbalanced opinions. So we're going to also... You know, when you think about liberty and what it means, there's just one thing that seems to be reminded of, and that is that with liberty comes responsibility. We haven't seen a lot of that in the immigrant population that we have here. Okay, so much for that. Our guest today is Marilyn Craig, guest number one. We put her first, Bob, because she is a lady. Other than that, why, she gets no other further billing. Marilyn, past regent of the Daughters of the American Revolution. My mother was fiercely proud of being a DAR. There's some lineage there that connects you to our history. And without that lineage, you cannot be a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution. So, Marilyn, tell us a little bit about the local chapter and also some of the history of the DAR.
Okay. First of all, I'd just like to begin with the history of the beginning of the DAR. The original National Society of the Daughters of American Revolution was begun in 1890 with 18 women. And since then, over 850,000 women have been able to join the DAR through tracking their lineage to the Revolutionary War. The Abraham Lincoln chapter was developed 6 years later by 11 ladies. And I just want to kind of read a little bit of the history. 11 ladies met at the home of Miss May Latham. And the names that I'm going to mention here are probably very familiar to a lot of people here. They met at the home for the purpose of organizing the chapter of the National Society of the Daughters of the American Revolution. And Miss Latham had been appointed organizing chapter by the state regent. The privilege of the Lincoln chapter was attributed to the Gillette sisters from the Elkhart area. Miss Nina was living in Washington, D.C. at the time, and so then Miss Jessie was from Elkhart, and so they joined the National Society and became charter members. And at that time it was just called the Lincoln chapter, and later on it was named the Abraham Lincoln chapter. But some of the ladies that I'd like to mention were the Gillespie, Miss Matilda Gillespie, Adeline Gillette Bates, and Mary Finley Davidson, and Helen Brewster Randolph. So a lot of those names are kind of familiar with Logan County.
I knew them all, Bob.
Yeah. So, but then one other thing I wanted to mention is when the National Society was organized in 1890, and we had all these people join, 850,000 and more to this date. And then in later years, the Memorial Continental Hall was built in Washington, D.C., not far from the Capitol and the White House. And so if you've ever been to Washington, D.C., if you ever have a chance to see Memorial Continental Hall, that's really a wonderful place to see. Have you ever been there to see it yourself?
Yes, I have.
And then later they had the museum and the science technology. And if you would go into those areas, you would look down and see a wonderful library, and people are just sitting around at computers and trying to research their genealogy and everything. And then they have exhibits in the hall that you can go see. And Illinois has a wonderful exhibit, a lot of antiques, and very, very interesting to see. So I really appreciate being asked to be here today, because we're always trying to reach out to the public to gain new members. And basically all you have to do is just contact us, and we help you track your genealogy. You just have to prove that you have a patriot from the American Revolution, and we can help you do that. So.
Well, the DAR does a lot more than just meet. They have a lot of ongoing of their own philanthropy, so to speak. The most prominent of which would be perhaps scholarships.
Yes.
And would you speak to some of the? I know the DAR awards scholarships in our schools.
Right.
And I think that's that's really an important thing. Would you like to speak to that just a minute?
Yes, and I want to give credit through our some of our members too. Sarah Benner has been really instrumental in getting a lot of our scholarships from our high school, and we present them. The American History Scholarship and Americanism and stuff like that. And also I want to mention that it's interesting. We try to really have interesting meetings also, and we do this through local people and try to hit on some of the topics that the DAR is instrumental in. One of them is the flag, and we had this gentleman right here, Bob, come to our meeting. He was a program for us, and he spoke on flag etiquette and the honor guard, and everybody loved that. We had yourself come and terms of history, and you spoke on the Chautauqua, because when you were growing up, you had grandparents and parents who were involved living out there at Chautauqua, and we met at the Elks, and you spoke, and you could look out and see where the Chautauqua was and that kind of thing. Steve Sauer, when we walked in, Steve Sauer was here, and we presented him an award, and he spoke to us on the Lincoln Museum one time. So we present preservation awards like Patrick Doolin, and we present Women in American History awards. Every year since the early 1900s, we have had a joint meeting with the Women's Club in Lincoln. So we really go back, and they give us a wonderful tea and wonderful service. And Carla Bender, for instance, spoke to us. Nancy the courier lady, Nancy, I'm trying to think her, Saul.
No, so Nancy Saul.
And so we've given them American History, Women in American History Awards. We went to the new hospital and had Joyce Leisman speak on women's issues because she does massage therapy and that kind of thing, and health related. So also some of our programs, we go to places like we've been to Hayworth to the Military Museum. That's one of the best kept secrets around. It's a wonderful museum. We've been to Atlanta to the museum there. It's wonderful. Recently we went out to the Oddfellows Museum, and it's just great with all the history of all the Oddfellows children and stuff like that. We've been to the Mason City Community Center. So we try to not just stay in Lincoln, but go around so that, because we have a lot of members from Mount Pulaski, Mason City, all that kind of stuff, so.
I went out to the Oddfellows Museum, Marilyn and Bob, a long time ago now. And when I was a kid in high school, this is not Abe Lincoln's time, Bob, but seriously, when I was a kid in high school, that was kind of in the heyday of the Oddfellows Children's Home.
Yes.
And of course, those of us who are natives remember how big that was and how the buildings and so forth. And they put some really good kids. They had their own elementary school system out there.
Yes.
And they put some really great kids and some great athletes into the high school system. And so I was out there just kind of reminiscing and visiting. And they said they even had some report cards from the kids and some of the kids. And I said, "Have you got one for Willard Smith?" And she looked it up, and sure enough, she did. And I said, it says straight A's everywhere.
Oh, how about
and
that?
He said, "Well, how'd you know that?" And I said, he was a very bright boy and one of the best athletes they ever put in out there, and a great guy.
Well, I had a young man in my high school Sunday school class that taught Sunday school at the Methodist Church named Chris Pigram. I don't know if you remember Chris Pigram. And he lived out there, and we kind of adopted him a little bit, but he was just a charmer and has gone on to just do wonderful things. And they were saying that so many of the kids who grew up there have just succeeded very, very well in life, and they come back and visit sometimes, and a lot. It was kind of interesting because sitting there listening to Mrs. Wick give the program, a lot of the ladies sitting there went to school with some of the kids that were from the Oddfellows. So.
Well, I often reflect how well they could operate that today. They ran it very well. Roy Johnson ran a good ship out there. In today's times, with everybody peeking over everybody's shoulder, Department of Children and Family Services and all this business, all the bureaucracy, they'd probably be hard-pressed to function in today's society, which is a shame, because what they served out there and what they did very, very well. By the way, they had their own band, they had their own cooking schools. They were pretty unique, had their own little community, so to speak, farm.
Yes.
And the boys and girls did their own, they all had chores. The DAR, genealogy, of course, is a key word because you have to do a lot of genealogy to prove that you have an ancestor back in that time. But over and above that, the genealogy factor in the DAR is a great aid and asset to people who want to get into that on their own for their own families. They have a lot of records.
That's right, and I'm so glad you brought that up because we have packets. If anyone is interested, for instance, in tracking their genealogy and seeing if they could be a daughter of the American Revolution, we have packets that we can give people. We have sites to go online. You can go through NSDAR, nationalsociety.org, Illinois.dar, and in our organization, we have a position called the registrar, and the registrar person is an expert in helping people find their genealogy and track it, see if they are a DAR. There's also SAR, Sons of the American Revolution. We don't have a local organization of that, but men can track their genealogy too and become sons of the American Revolution. And there's also CAR, which is Children of the American Revolution, and that's the children of the people who have already tracked it. But we have little membership action packets that can be used to track, and so there's a lot of help out there. We can go state and national, and we can find it if it's there. Sometimes it's not, and we've worked really hard, but usually we come up with something. So.
I note in the looking, thank goodness for Google.
Yes,
Because
yes.
it really is an asset when you're trying to think about
Yeah,
something and do a little
absolutely,
research.
yeah, uh-huh.
But I note also that they can aid and assist if somebody is looking for abstracts, certain periodicals and so
Yes.
forth. It takes a lot of searching and digging,
Mhm.
but those things are available
They
through
are.
the Daughters of the American Revolution
Yes,
sites.
Yes, and we have workshops that people can go to, and so, libraries, all kinds of certificates from the past can be used to determine that. So there's a lot of help out there to find.
What is our local membership numbers right now, approximately?
In the Abraham Lincoln chapter has 45 members.
Mhm.
They're dwindling through the years, and some of those people live out of state, but they have retained. We also have associate members, people who may actually go to another or live elsewhere and go to another chapter, but they still want to maintain their associate member with the Abraham Lincoln chapter. And we have state meetings, we have national meetings in Washington, D.C. at the Continental Congress. We have district meetings that we all go to, and so we're pretty active. It's a great organization to belong to, and to hand down, like you mentioned, to your heirs and grandchildren. So, interesting enough, I just had a lady the other day call me, and for Mother's Day, her daughter gave her the gift of the DAR, and she gave it to her granddaughter also. So I thought that was pretty cool.
That is cool, but you mentioned a phrase that kind of rings, and it's true in all organizations really. Some of the interest is dwindling. It's due to the generational thing.
Mm-hmm.
As we get older and the younger people come along, unless they have a family member who's intensely interested in that, suddenly it's not as important to the younger people.
And I'm so
and that's
glad-
too bad.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because even though the younger people may not really be interested now, later on, if they already have that, they might be interested, So I know I was much older when I got involved. And so my aunt pressed me to be a member, and she, please, look into it, and she gave me some information, and then several ladies helped me acquire mine, so.
Well, that's what
it's
it
something
takes.
that you can pass on, yeah.
Now, we want to morph into something another problem that Bob Sullivan is experiencing, and all organizations are experiencing, that is a generational thing. But before we do that, I'd like to take a commercial break, and everybody run out and get their flags ready to put out tomorrow.